Every parent knows the weight of failing their children, but Jack Calder carried that burden like a stone in his chest every single day. When his estranged father died and left him just $1 in the will, that stone grew heavier. It felt like the final proof that he'd never be enough for anyone who mattered. Jack thought that single crumpled bill was his father's last cruel joke. He was wrong. When a mysterious lawyer showed up at his door months later, everything changed. The lawyer had a message about hidden treasure and looking in places Jack never thought to search. His father hadn't abandoned the family after all. He'd been playing a 30-year game that only Jack could finish. But what if the real prize wasn't money? What if his father had been trying to teach him something far more valuable all along? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through Jack Calder's restless sleep at 4:30 in the morning, same as it had for the past 8 months. He rolled over in the narrow bed, his back protesting against the cheap mattress that had seen better decades. Through the thin walls of their rental duplex, he could hear the neighbor's television already blaring. Another early riser heading to a job that barely paid the bills. Jack's calloused fingers found Sarah's wedding ring on the nightstand, a simple gold band he'd kept there since her funeral 2 years ago. Each morning, he held it for just a moment, feeling the smooth metal, warm under his touch. It was a ritual that grounded him, a connection to the woman who'd believed he could be more than he'd become. Sarah would have known what to do about everything. The unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter, Emma's college applications they couldn't afford to pursue, the way Marcus had grown quiet since starting middle school, little Lucy's nightmares about losing another parent. The house creaked as Jack padded down the hallway, checking on his children out of habit. Emma's room first. His 16-year-old daughter slept with textbooks scattered across her bed, exhausted from another late night of studying and her part-time job at the local diner. She'd inherited Sarah's determination and her mother's gentle strength, but Jack worried about the weight she carried, trying to be the woman of the house when she should just be a teenager figuring out her place in the world. Marcus's door stood, slightly ajar, revealing the 12-year-old curled up with an old baseball glove Sarah had bought him 3 summers ago. The boy had talent, real talent, but Jack couldn't afford the league fees or the equipment that might give his son a real chance. Every week Jack watched other kids with their matching uniforms and private coaches, knowing Marcus was just as good, but lacking the opportunities that money could buy. 8-year-old Lucy's room was a shrine to colorful drawings and stuffed animals, but lately her artwork had grown darker. Purple crayon families, where the daddy figure stood far away from the mommy and kids. Lucy missed her mother with the pure, unguarded grief of childhood, and Jack often felt helpless against the questions she asked about why people had to die and leave the people they loved behind. In the kitchen, Jack started the coffee maker, a wedding gift from Sarah's mother that had somehow survived 15 moves and countless mornings just like this one. The ritual of measuring grounds and adding water gave his hands something to do, while his mind wandered to the growing pile of medical bills from Sarah's final months. The insurance had covered most of the treatments, but most still left them, with debts that would take years to pay off, assuming nothing else went wrong. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom Bradley, his supervisor at the community center. "Need you to stay late tonight. Johnson called in sick again." Jack typed back. A quick confirmation, though staying late meant missing Lucy's school play rehearsal. Another small failure to add to the growing list of moments he couldn't give his children. The Seaside Community Center had been Jack's lifeline after Sarah died, and he'd lost his job at the construction company. Night janitor wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep food on the table and the lights on mostly. The center served families like his, working parents who needed somewhere safe for their kids after school, seniors who gathered for meals and conversation, teenagers looking for alternatives to the streets. Jack had grown to appreciate the quiet dignity of the place, even if mopping floors and emptying trash cans wasn't what he'd imagined doing at 42. Mrs. Chen from next door knocked on the kitchen window, holding up a covered dish with a knowing smile. The elderly woman had appointed herself the unofficial grandmother to Jack's children, appearing with homemade meals whenever she sensed the family was struggling more than usual. Her own grandchildren lived across the country, and she'd transferred all her nurturing energy to the Calder family. Jack opened the back door, accepting the warm casserole with gratitude that always made his throat tight. "You work too hard, Jack," she said in her gentle, accented voice. "Children need their father present, not just providing." She was right, of course. Emma had started making decisions about her future without consulting him. Marcus barely spoke, unless directly asked a question, and Lucy clung to him with an intensity that worried the school counselor. They were all trying to protect each other, tiptoeing around their shared grief and financial stress like survivors of some ongoing disaster. The morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Emma emerged from her room already dressed for school, grabbing a piece of toast and her backpack in one fluid motion. She kissed Jack's cheek, a gesture that reminded him painfully of Sarah, and headed for the door. "Pick up Lucy from aftercare," she reminded him. "I've got a double shift at the diner." Marcus appeared next, sleep still heavy in his eyes, but moving with the careful quietness he'd developed since his mother's death. He accepted Mrs. Chen's casserole gratefully, eating with the methodical focus of a growing boy who understood food wasn't unlimited in their house. Lucy bounded into the kitchen last, her blonde hair wild from sleep, chattering about her upcoming performance as a sunflower in the school play. Her excitement was infectious and heartbreaking. She threw herself into joy with the same intensity she brought to her worries about losing people she loved. "Daddy, you're coming tonight, right? I practiced my lines about how sunflowers always face the sun, even when it's cloudy." Jack's heart clenched. Tom's text about working late meant missing another milestone, another moment he couldn't get back. But the overtime pay would cover Lucy's school lunch account, which had fallen behind again. "I'll try, sweetheart. Daddy has to work, but maybe Emma can record it for me." The disappointment in Lucy's eyes was quickly masked by her determination to be brave, another small tragedy in a life that had already asked too much of her young heart. After the children left for school, Jack sat alone in the quiet kitchen, holding his coffee cup and staring at the stack of bills that seemed to multiply overnight. Medical debt, utilities, rent, car repairs. Each envelope represented another month of struggle, another reminder that he was barely keeping his family afloat. The irony wasn't lost on him that his own father, Richard Calder, lived less than 20 miles away in a mansion overlooking the coast, wealthy enough to solve every problem Jack faced with what would amount to pocket change. But Richard had made his position clear 15 years ago when Jack married Sarah against his wishes. "You're choosing a life of mediocrity," his father had said. "Don't come crawling back when reality sets in." Jack had been too proud to crawl back, even when reality had indeed set in with devastating completeness. Sarah's illness had drained their savings, her death had shattered their family's stability, and Jack's own health had suffered under the weight of grief and financial stress. But asking Richard for help would mean admitting his father had been right about everything, and that admission felt like a betrayal of Sarah's memory and his own dignity. The coastal town of Beacon Point had been Jack's childhood home, but it had changed over the years, gentrified by wealthy retirees and summer residents who drove up property values and drove out families like his. The community center stood as one of the few remaining places where working families could find support and connection, but even it struggled with funding cuts and deferred maintenance. Jack's phone buzzed again, a reminder from the school about Lucy's play. He stared at the screen, torn between love for his daughter and the practical reality that missing work meant missing money they desperately needed. This was parenthood, In poverty, a constant series of impossible choices between being present and providing, between immediate needs and future dreams. As he prepared to leave for his morning job search, he'd been looking for day work to supplement his night job. Jack caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back was thinner than he'd been a year ago, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too many worries. His hair, once the same sandy brown as Marcus's, now showed silver at the temples. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by circumstances that seemed determined to break him. But in his reflection, he also saw Sarah's faith in him, his children's need for him, and somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion, the stubborn strength that had kept him standing through everything life had thrown at their family. Today would be another day of small battles and smaller victories, another day of choosing hope over despair, another day of proving that love, even when stretched thin by poverty and loss, was still the most powerful force in any family. Jack grabbed his keys and headed for the door, carrying Sarah's ring in his pocket like a talisman against the day's challenges, unaware that everything he thought he knew about his father, his family, and his own worth was about to change forever. Certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Jack had missed Lucy's sunflower performance. The envelope bore the letterhead of Pemberton Walsh and Associates, attorneys at law, and Jack's name, written in formal script that somehow managed to look both important and ominous. Emma found it first, sliding it across the kitchen table with the careful neutrality she'd developed whenever anything official arrived. Medical bills, overdue notices, legal documents, they'd all become part of their family's landscape of worry. "It's about Grandpa Richard," she said quietly, reading over Jack's shoulder as he opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The first document was a death certificate. Richard Calder, age 68, had died of heart failure in his sleep exactly 1 month ago. Jack stared at the paper, feeling an unexpected hollowness where anger had lived for so long. His father was gone, and somehow that seemed impossible. Richard had been such a constant presence in Jack's thoughts, a source of resentment and regret, that his actual absence felt surreal. Marcus appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder, ready for school. "What's wrong, Dad?" "Your grandfather died," Jack said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. The children had never met Richard, had never even seen a recent photograph. He'd been more myth than man in their lives. The rich grandfather who wanted nothing to do with them. Lucy climbed into Jack's lap, her small face serious. "The mean one who made you sad." Jack winced. In trying to explain his father's absence without poisoning his children against their grandfather, he'd apparently failed on both counts. "He wasn't mean, sweetheart. He was just complicated." The second document in the envelope was a notice to attend the reading of Richard Calder's last will and testament. Jack's hands shook as he read the appointment time, Thursday at 2 p.m. at the law offices in downtown Beacon Point. He would have to ask Tom for time off, which meant losing pay they couldn't afford to lose. Thursday arrived grey and drizzling, the kind of Pacific Northwest weather that seemed designed to match Jack's mood. The law office occupied the top floor of the oldest building in Beacon Point's historic district, all polished wood and leather chairs that spoke of money and tradition. Jack felt out of place in his one good suit, the same black suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled silver hair, directed him to a conference room where several other people had already gathered. Jack recognized a few faces from the newspaper's society pages, board members from various charities, local business leaders, people who moved in Richard's world of wealth and influence. Mr. Pemberton, a distinguished man in his 70s, entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing the solemn expression reserved for such occasions. "Thank you all for coming. We're here today to execute the final wishes of Richard Harrison Calder." Jack half listened as Pemberton read through the formal language of legal documents. Richard's vast estate, valued at over $50 million, would be distributed among various charitable organizations. The Children's Hospital would receive 10 million. The food bank would get 5 million. The scholarship fund for local students would receive another 5 million. Jack found himself grudgingly impressed, despite his resentment. At least his father had done some good with his wealth, even if he'd never shared any of it with his own son and grandchildren. And finally, Pemberton continued, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, to my son, Jack Harrison Calder, I leave the sum of $1, along with this message. Some gifts require understanding before they can be received. The room fell silent. Jack felt heat rise in his cheeks as every face turned toward him. $1. His father's final insult, delivered in front of a room full of strangers who now knew exactly how little Richard Calder had thought of his only child. Pemberton slid a crisp $1 bill across the polished table. It looked obscenely small against the dark wood, like a joke that had gone too far. Jack stared at it, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. I'm sorry, Jack said, standing abruptly. I can't. He walked out of the conference room without taking the dollar, leaving behind the whispered conversations and pitying looks. In the elevator, alone, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. His father's final message was crystal clear. Even in death, Richard wanted Jack to know he was worth exactly $1. The drive home passed in a blur of rain and rage. Jack found himself taking the long way, driving past Richard's estate on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The massive house sat dark and empty behind its iron gates, a monument to wealth and isolation. Had his father died alone in that huge house? Had he thought of Jack at all in his final moments? At home, the children were waiting with Mrs. Chen, who had prepared another of her healing meals. Jack tried to compose himself before walking through the door, but Emma's sharp eyes missed nothing. "How did it go?" she asked. Jack pulled out his phone and showed them a photo he'd taken of the dollar bill before leaving the law office. "Your grandfather left me $1. That's it. $1. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding of what that meant. Not just the money, though God knew they needed every penny, but the final confirmation that Richard Calder had never forgiven his son for choosing love over wealth, family over status. Marcus picked up the phone, studying the image of the dollar bill. Why would he do that? "Because he was angry with me for marrying your mother," Jack said, the truth feeling both liberating and painful. "He wanted me to marry someone from his world, someone who could help him build some kind of dynasty. When I chose your mom instead, he cut me off." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. "But Mama was the best person ever." "Yes, she was," Jack said, pulling his youngest daughter close. "And I'd make the same choice again every single time." Emma stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the rain. "So that's it. We're still broke, and now we know for sure that Grandpa hated us." "He didn't hate you," Mrs. Chen interjected gently. "Hate is not the same as hurt pride. Sometimes people who love us make terrible choices because they don't know how to show that love properly." Jack wanted to believe her, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. 15 years of silence, followed by a $1 inheritance that felt like a slap across the face from beyond the grave. His father had made his feelings perfectly clear. That night, after the children were asleep, Jack sat in his small bedroom holding the photograph of the dollar bill. He'd left the actual bill at the law office, refusing to bring that symbol of rejection into his home. But the image on his phone seemed to burn into his retinas, proof of his father's final judgment. He thought about calling Pemberton's office to officially refuse even this insulting inheritance, but something stopped him. Maybe it was Mrs. Chen's words about hurt pride and terrible choices. Maybe it was the nagging feeling that his father's message, "Some gifts require understanding before they can be received," meant something more than it appeared to. Or maybe he was just too tired to fight anymore. The dollar bill would sit in some lawyer's safe, and Jack would continue his daily struggle to keep his family afloat knowing now with absolute certainty that no help would ever come from the father who had chosen wealth over love, reputation, over family. As Jack finally drifted off to sleep, he didn't notice the car parked across the street or the woman inside watching his house with the patient attention of someone who understood that some stories take time to unfold properly. Elena Martinez had been waiting for this moment for months, and now that Richard Calder's final game had begun, she would make sure his son understood the rules before it was too late to play. Elena Martinez knocked on Jack's door exactly 1 week after the will reading, arriving during the dinner hour when she knew the whole family would be home. Through the window, she could see them gathered around their small kitchen table, a scene of comfortable chaos that would have made Richard proud if he'd allowed himself to witness it. Jack opened the door, wearing a stained work shirt and the wary expression of a man who'd learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Elena recognized his features immediately, the same strong jawline as his father, the same penetrating blue eyes, though Jack's held a wariness that Richard's had never shown. "Mr. Calder, I'm Elena Martinez. I was your father's attorney. May I come in?" Jack's face hardened. "If this is about that dollar, you can keep it. I don't want anything from him." "It's not about the dollar," Elena said gently. "Well, not entirely. Your father left specific instructions for me to contact you exactly 1 week after the will reading. He said you'd need time to process before you could hear what he really wanted to tell you." Emma appeared at Jack's shoulder, curious about the well-dressed woman at their door. "Dad, is everything okay?" Elena smiled at the teenager. "You must be Emma. Your grandfather talked about you often. He was very proud of your academic achievements." "He never met us," Emma said, confusion clear in her voice. "No," Elena agreed. "But he knew about you, all of you. May I please come in? I think you'll want to hear this sitting down." Jack reluctantly stepped aside, leading Elena into their modest living room. Marcus and Lucy peered around the corner from the kitchen, their curiosity overcoming their usual shyness around strangers. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen as well, having been helping with dinner when Elena arrived. Elena opened her briefcase and withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and heavy use. "Your father kept this for the last 15 years of his life. Every entry is about your family." She handed the journal to Jack, who accepted it with obvious reluctance. The leather was soft and worn, clearly handled frequently. Jack opened it to a random page and found his father's familiar handwriting. March 15th, 2019, Jack's boy Marcus hit a triple in today's game. Watched from the parking lot. The kid has natural talent. Reminds me of Jack at that age. Wish I could tell him how proud I am. But I made my choice. Some distances become too wide to cross. Jack's hands trembled as he turned more pages. Entry after entry detailed moments from their lives. Emma's honor roll achievements, Lucy's first steps, Sarah's cancer diagnosis. His father had been watching, documenting, caring from a distance that Jack had interpreted as abandonment. "How?" Jack whispered. "He hired investigators," Elena explained. "Not to intrude, but to stay informed. He attended every school play from the back row, every baseball game from the parking lot. He knew about Sarah's illness before you did. Her oncologist was a family friend." Lucy climbed onto the couch beside Jack, looking at the journal with wide eyes. "Grandpa wrote about us?" Elena nodded. "Every birthday, every achievement, every challenge your family faced, he documented it all. Because he loved you, but he believed his presence in your lives would bring you more harm than good." "What kind of harm?" Emma asked, settling into a chair across from them. Elena exchanged glances with Jack, measuring how much truth this family was ready to handle. "Your grandfather made some powerful enemies in his business dealings. He received death threats, attempts at extortion. When Jack chose to marry Sarah and start a family, Richard made the decision to distance himself to protect you all. So he was protecting us by abandoning us." Jack's voice carried years of accumulated pain. "He was protecting you by making himself appear to abandon you," Elena corrected. "There's a difference, though I understand why it wouldn't feel that way to you." She reached into her briefcase again and withdrew a manila envelope. "Your father's final instructions were very specific. He wanted you to have this journal first, to begin understanding his perspective. Then, if you chose to continue, he left additional information that would lead you to the full truth." Jack opened the envelope and found a single piece of paper with an address written in his father's handwriting. "The Beacon Point Lighthouse, Sunset, any day you're ready to understand." "The lighthouse has been abandoned for years," Marcus said, leaning over to read the address. "Not abandoned," Elena said, "maintained. Your father has been using it as a place to think, to remember. He wanted you to meet him there, in a sense." Mrs. Chen, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, finally spoke. "Mr. Jack, sometimes the people who love us most make choices that hurt us in order to protect us. It doesn't make the hurt less real, but it might make the love more clear." Jack closed the journal and looked around at his family. Emma's intelligent eyes full of questions, Marcus's curiosity overcoming his usual reserve, Lucy's innocent confusion about the grandfather she'd never known. They deserved to understand their history, even if Jack wasn't sure he was ready for more revelations. "What's really at the lighthouse?" he asked Elena. "I don't know," she admitted. "Your father was very specific that I wasn't to know everything. He said this journey was meant for you alone, though he hoped your family would join you when you were ready." Emma stood up suddenly. "I want to go. I want to understand why he stayed away." "Emma," Jack began. "No, Dad. We've lived our whole lives thinking our grandfather didn't care about us. If there's a chance that isn't true, don't we owe it to ourselves to find out?" Marcus nodded agreement. "What if he had good reasons? What if we've been wrong?" "About everything." Lucy looked between her siblings and father. "Can we go tomorrow? I want to see where Grandpa went to think about us." Jack stared at the address, feeling the weight of decision. Part of him wanted to refuse, to protect his family from potential disappointment or manipulation. But another part, the part that had always wondered if he'd misunderstood something fundamental about his father, wanted answers to questions that had haunted him for 15 years. "If we do this," he said finally, "we do it together, all of us. And if it turns out to be some kind of cruel game, we leave and never look back." Elena stood, gathering her things. "Your father believed you would choose to understand rather than to judge. He said you inherited your mother's heart, but his stubbornness and that combination would eventually lead you to the truth." After Elena left, the family sat in their living room, passing the journal between them, reading entries about their own lives, written by a man they'd never known was watching. Each page revealed a grandfather who had celebrated their victories from afar and worried about their struggles in silence. As the evening wore on, Jack found himself planning a trip to the lighthouse, curious despite his caution about what other secrets his father had left behind. The $1 inheritance was beginning to feel less like an insult and more like the first move in a game whose rules he was only beginning to understand. The lighthouse stood sentinel on Beacon Point's highest cliff, its white tower stark against the grey morning sky. Jack parked their old Honda in the sandy lot, remembering childhood visits when the lighthouse had still been operational. Now it looked weathered but not abandoned. Someone had clearly been maintaining the structure. Emma carried her grandfather's journal, having appointed herself the family historian for this expedition. Marcus brought his baseball glove, a nervous habit he'd developed since Sarah's death. Lucy clutched Jack's hand as they approached the lighthouse door, her usual chatter subdued by the gravity of the moment. The door stood slightly ajar, and Jack pushed it open cautiously. Inside, the circular room had been transformed into something between a study and a shrine. Comfortable chairs surrounded a small table, and the walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, all featuring Jack's family across the years. "Oh, my God," Emma whispered, moving closer to examine the pictures. There was Jack at his high school graduation, unaware that his father sat in the back row of the auditorium. Sarah, in her wedding dress, photographed from a distance as she left the church. The children's school pictures, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, all captured by someone who cared enough to be present but remained invisible. Lucy pointed to a recent photo of herself performing in the school play. Grandpa was there. "But I looked for you, Daddy, and you weren't there." Jack's throat tightened. His father had been at Lucy's performance, the one Jack had missed because of work. While Jack was emptying trash cans and mopping floors, Richard had been in the audience, watching his granddaughter bloom under the stage lights. Marcus found a section of wall dedicated to his baseball games. Action shots of him at bat, sliding, into second base, celebrating with teammates. "He knew about baseball," Marcus said wonderingly. "Look, Dad, he even kept my stats." A handwritten chart tracked Marcus's batting average, RBIs, and stolen bases across 3 seasons. Notes in the margins revealed his grandfather's analysis. Natural power hitter, needs work on patience at the plate. Reminds me of Jack's swing. At that age, Emma discovered a small desk tucked into an alcove, its surface covered with college brochures and scholarship applications. Her name was written across the top of several forms, along with detailed financial calculations in Richard's neat handwriting. "He was planning to help with college," she said, her voice barely audible. "Look, he researched every scholarship I might qualify for, calculated the gaps, figured out how to make it work." Jack moved deeper into the room, overwhelmed by the evidence of his father's hidden involvement in their lives. A section near the window contained medical documents, Sarah's treatment records, insurance claims, hospital bills. Red ink marked several entries. "Paid in full, RC." He helped with "Mom's medical bills?" Jack asked aloud, though no one could answer. Behind the medical files, Jack found a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. The return address made his heart stop. Sarah Calder, their old address from when they'd first moved to the rental house. With trembling fingers, Jack untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. Sarah's familiar handwriting filled the page. "Dear Richard, I know Jack would be furious if he knew I was writing to you, but someone needs to bridge this gap between 2 stubborn men who love each other too much to admit it. Jack talks about you, more than he realizes, wondering if you're proud of him, hoping you'll call, checking the newspaper for mentions of your business. He married me despite your disapproval, but he's never stopped wanting your approval. I think you know that. I also think you know that staying away is hurting him more than whatever business troubles you're trying to protect us from. Your son is a good man, Richard. The best man I know. He works 2 jobs to keep our family afloat, reads bedtime stories with voices that make the children giggle, and holds me when the cancer treatments make me too sick to be strong. You would be proud of the father he's become. I'm writing because I want you to know your grandchildren before it's too late. Emma has your intelligence and Jack's heart. Marcus has your competitive spirit, but tempers it with kindness. Lucy sees the world with wonder that reminds me of Jack when we first met. I don't know how much time I have left, but I know I don't want to waste any of it on family feuds that serve no one. Please consider reaching out. Jack needs his father, even if he's too proud to admit it. With hope, Sarah Jack's vision blurred as he read letter after letter. Sarah had maintained a correspondence with Richard throughout her illness, updating him on the children's activities, sharing photos, and gently advocating for reconciliation between father and son. Richard's responses were carefully preserved. In a separate bundle, his handwriting revealed a man struggling between love and fear. Dear Sarah, your letters are both a gift and a torment. To know my grandchildren through your words, to see their faces in the photographs you send, fills a void I've carried since Jack chose his path. But you don't understand the stakes. The Kowalski family still bears grudges from the shipping deal that went bad in 1995. They've made it clear that anyone I care about becomes a target. Keeping my distance keeps you safe. I've arranged for anonymous assistance with your medical expenses. Please don't tell Jack. His pride would never accept help from me, even indirectly. I've also established trust funds for the children's education, to be accessed when they reach 18. You ask me to reach out, but what if my presence brings danger to your door? What if the men who threatened me decide to use my family against me? I couldn't live with myself if my selfishness put you or the children at risk. Please give my love to Jack, though I know you can't tell him it comes from me. Richard. The correspondence continued through Sarah's final months, her handwriting growing weaker, but her determination to reunite father and son never wavering. Her last letter, dated just 2 weeks before her death, contained a simple request. Richard, when I'm gone, Jack will need you more than ever. I won't be there to soften his edges or encourage his heart. Promise me you'll find a way to let him know he's loved. Our children deserve to know their grandfather, and you deserve to know them. Don't let pride steal what time you have left. The final letter in the bundle was from Richard to Sarah, but it was marked unsent in red ink. My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, you'll be gone, and I'll have lost my chance to thank you properly for trying to heal what I thought was beyond repair. You were right about everything. About Jack's character, about the children's need for family, about the futility of letting fear govern love. I've made arrangements for after my death. I can't repair the damage I've done while I'm alive, but perhaps I can give Jack the truth posthumously. I've left him a trail of breadcrumbs that will lead him here, to this room, to these letters, to the understanding that some distances are meant to be crossed, even if it takes a lifetime to find the bridge. Thank you for loving my son completely and for trying to love me despite my failures. Take care of him from wherever you've gone. I'll try to take care of him from here. All my love and regret. Richard. Jack sat heavily in one of the lighthouse chairs, surrounded by his family and the evidence of a love he'd never recognized. Emma curled up beside him, reading over his shoulder. Marcus examined more photographs, and Lucy discovered a toy chest filled with gifts that had never been given, birthday presents, Christmas surprises, just because treasures that Richard had collected but never found the courage to deliver. As afternoon sunlight slanted through the lighthouse windows, Jack began to understand that his father's greatest inheritance wasn't money. It was the painful wisdom that love sometimes requires sacrifice. Distance sometimes protects better than presence, and pride is often just fear wearing a more acceptable face. The $1 bill suddenly made sense as the first piece of a larger puzzle, designed to bring him here, to this moment of revelation, when he could finally see his father clearly. At the bottom of the toy chest, beneath years of accumulated gifts that Richard had never found the courage to deliver, Emma discovered an ornate brass key attached to a small card. The key was old and heavy, its surface green with age, and the card bore another message in Richard's careful handwriting. The highest point sees the clearest picture. Look where light once guided ships to safety. Jack turned the key over in his palm, feeling its weight. Another riddle, he said, though his tone held curiosity rather than frustration now. Marcus studied the card. Ships to safety. He's talking about the lighthouse beacon, right? But this lighthouse doesn't work anymore. Maybe it does, Emma said, moving toward the spiral staircase that led to the upper levels of the lighthouse. Come on. Let's see what this key opens. The family climbed the narrow stairs together, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. Lucy counted each step aloud, her voice bouncing off the curved walls. At the top, they emerged into the lantern, room where the lighthouse beam had once warned ships away from the rocky coast. The original beacon equipment had been removed years ago, but the room wasn't empty. Instead, it had been converted into what could only be described as a memory vault. Glass display cases lined the circular walls, each containing artifacts from Jack's life and family history. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock of the central display case. Inside, Jack found his high school yearbook, open to his graduation photo. along with newspaper clippings about his wedding to Sarah. But it was the item at the center that took his breath away. A framed photograph of 4-year-old Jack sitting on Richard's shoulders at this very lighthouse, both of them squinting into the sun and grinning with unguarded joy. "You came here with Grandpa when you were little?" Lucy asked, studying the photo. Henry Walsh pulled out a folder marked Foundation Documents and handed it to Jack with the reverence of someone delivering sacred texts. "Your father's final project," he said. "He spent the last 5 years of his life building something he hoped you'd continue." Jack opened the folder to find legal documents establishing the Calder Community Foundation, along with detailed plans for programs targeting working families like his own. But what made his hands shake was the list of properties and investments that had been secretly funding their community for years. "The Seaside Community Center," Jack read aloud, his voice barely steady. "Richard Calder, sole owner since 2010. Emma leaned closer. "Dad, that's where you work, where we all work in a way," Henry said gently. "Your father bought it when the city was going to shut it down for budget cuts. He's been operating it at a loss ever since, funding after-school programs, senior meals, family counseling services. Marcus found his name on a scholarship list. The academic achievement awards that I applied for, those came from Grandpa too." Henry nodded. "Merit-based, though. Your grandfather insisted that any help he provided had to be earned. He never wanted charity, he wanted opportunity." Jack continued reading, discovering the scope of his father's hidden philanthropy. The local food bank, the free medical clinic, the job training programs that had helped dozens of families transition out of poverty, all funded by Richard Calder through a network of anonymous donations and shell companies. "Mrs. Chen," Jack said suddenly, remembering their neighbor's inexplicable financial stability despite her limited income. "Did he help her too?" "Her grandson needed heart surgery 3 years ago," Henry confirmed. "Experimental procedure, not covered by insurance. The hospital called it a research grant, but the money came from your father's medical foundation." Lucy, who had been quietly examining the videotapes, held up one labeled Lucy's First Steps, 2016. Her small voice was filled with wonder. "Grandpa saw me walk for the first time." "Your father was at the park that day," Henry said softly, "sitting on a bench with a newspaper, pretending to read while watching you toddle around the playground. He came home so excited he could barely contain himself. Kept saying, 'She's gonna be a runner just like Jack was.'" Jack remembered that day perfectly. Sarah had been having a good day between chemo treatments, and they'd spent the afternoon at the park as a family. He'd been so focused on helping Lucy navigate the playground equipment that he'd never noticed the man with the newspaper. "How long have you known about all this?" Jack asked Henry. "I've been your father's friend for 25 years, Henry replied. "I was the only one he trusted with the truth about why he stayed away. It ate at him every day, Jack. Every birthday party he watched from a distance. Every school play he attended from the back row. Every family milestone he witnessed. But couldn't share. It broke his heart a little more each time." Henry moved to a wall display that Jack hadn't noticed before. Behind glass, a detailed map of Beacon Point showed colored pins marking various locations. Red pins marked places where the Kowalski family had been active. Blue pins showed properties and businesses that Richard owned or supported. Green pins indicated places where Jack's family spent time. "Your father mapped your entire life," Henry explained. "School routes, work schedules, favorite restaurants, the grocery store where you shopped. He knew your routines better than you did, because he had to stay far enough away to keep you safe while staying close enough to help if you needed it." Emma traced the routes on the map with her finger. "This is insane. He was like a guardian angel we never knew existed." "More like a guardian ghost," Marcus said, and Jack felt the accuracy of that description like a physical blow. Henry reached into his bag again and withdrew a thick envelope. "Your father's final instructions. He wanted you to have this only. After you'd seen everything else, after you understood the scope of what he'd built." Inside the envelope, Jack found a handwritten letter in his father's familiar script. "My dearest Jack, If you're reading this, it means you've chosen to understand rather than to judge, to seek truth rather than to nurse old wounds. I'm proud of you for that choice, though I know I have no right to feel pride in a son I failed so completely. By now you've seen the evidence of my hidden involvement in your life. I hope you understand that every decision I made, from the moment the threats began until the day I died, was motivated by love. Not the love that expresses itself in hugs and birthday cards, but the love that sacrifices its own happiness to ensure the safety of what matters most. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I robbed you of a father's presence during the years when you needed guidance most. I robbed my grandchildren of a grandfather's love during their most formative years. I robbed Sarah of the family support she deserved during her illness. These are failures I'll carry into whatever comes after this life, but I also know you're questioning everything you believed about our relationship, and that questioning is painful. Let me give you the truth, simply and clearly. I never stopped loving you. Not for one moment, not through one day of our separation. You were always my greatest pride and my deepest regret. Pride in the man you became despite my absence. Regret that my presence would have endangered the very qualities that made me proud. The foundation you've discovered is my attempt to give you something more valuable than money. The opportunity to transform a community in ways that I could only dream about. I built the infrastructure, but I always hoped you would become the heart of it. You've spent your adult life believing you weren't enough, not successful enough, not wealthy enough, not worthy of love or respect. These beliefs are my failures. As a father, not truths about your character. You are everything I hoped you would become, a devoted father, a loyal husband, a man who works honestly and loves completely. The real inheritance isn't the money, Jack. It's the choice I'm offering you now. You can take the wealth and disappear into comfort, or you can take the foundation and transform it into something that lifts up families like yours. You can be the father to your community that I never knew how to be to you. Whatever you choose, know that Sarah was right about everything. She saw the good in both of us and tried to bridge the gap that my fear created. Honor her memory by choosing love. Over fear, connection over protection, presence over absence. Your children are remarkable. Jack, Emma has the intelligence to change the world. Marcus has the heart to heal it. And Lucy has the joy to celebrate every small victory along the way. Be present for their triumphs and their struggles. Don't make my mistakes. I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry it took my death to find the courage to say so. Dad Jack read the letter twice before he could speak, his throat tight with emotions he'd suppressed for 15 years. Around him, his family waited in respectful silence while he processed his father's final words. "What's the real inheritance he's talking about?" Emma finally asked. Henry smiled sadly. "Tomorrow, Elena Martinez will present you with the true will, the one that leaves your father's entire estate to Jack, with the condition that it be used to continue and expand the community foundation. Your grandfather built the structure, but he always intended for your father to give it heart and direction." $50 million, Jack whispered, remembering the figure from the original will reading. "Closer to 75 million now," Henry corrected. "Your father was very good at making money grow, even when he was giving most of it away." As the sun set over the Pacific, Jack stood in the lighthouse where he'd once felt safely held in his father's arms, finally understanding that Richard had never really let him go. He'd simply loved him from a distance that kept him safe while keeping his father's heart perpetually broken. The $1 bill had been the key to a treasure greater than money, the knowledge that he had been loved completely, protected fiercely, and trusted ultimately to carry forward a legacy of service that could transform not just his own family's life, but the lives of everyone in their community who struggled as they had struggled. Elena Martinez arrived at the lighthouse as the last rays of sunlight painted the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. She carried a briefcase that seemed heavier than her previous visits, and her usual composed demeanor showed cracks of anticipation mixed with apprehension. "I see Henry has prepared you for what comes next," she said, observing Jack's tear-stained face and the scattered documents around the lighthouse room. Jack held up his father's letter. "He says there's a real will, that the $1 was never the actual inheritance." Elena set her briefcase on the small table and opened it with deliberate care. "Your father was many things, Jack, but he was never cruel. The public will reading was theatre. Necessary theatre, but theatre nonetheless." She withdrew a document thick with legal seals and ribbon. "This is Richard Harrison Calder's true last will and testament, witnessed and notarized, filed under seal until such time as—" "You completed his final test?" "Test?" Emma asked, moving closer to read over Elena's shoulder. "He needed to know you would choose understanding over bitterness," Elena explained. "That you would seek truth rather than nurse grievances. The man who wrote angry letters demanding his rightful inheritance wasn't ready for this responsibility. The man who spent days in a lighthouse reading love letters between his parents and understanding the complexity of sacrifice, that man might be." Elena opened the document and began reading the formal language, but the essential truth was simple and staggering. Richard Calder's entire estate, now valued at $78 million, was left to Jack with the sole condition that it be used to establish and maintain the Calder Family Foundation for Community Development. "He's giving us everything," Marcus said, his young voice filled with awe. "Not giving," Elena corrected gently. "Entrusting. There's a significant difference." She turned to a section of the will that outlined the Foundation's mission. The language was precise but emotional, describing programs for working families, educational opportunities for children from low-income households, medical assistance for families facing catastrophic illness, and job training for adults seeking to improve their circumstances. "Your father spent 5 years researching and designing these programs," Elena continued. "He studied what worked in other communities, what failed, what was needed, but never attempted. This isn't just money, Jack. It's a blueprint for transforming. Our community takes care of its own." Lucy had climbed into one of the lighthouse chairs and was listening with the serious attention she usually reserved for bedtime stories. "Does this mean we're rich now?" Jack laughed despite his emotional turmoil. "It means we have a big job to do, sweetheart." Elena pulled out another folder. "Your father anticipated that question. The will provides for the family's reasonable needs: housing, education, medical care, a modest living allowance, but the bulk of the wealth is designated for community use. You'll be comfortable but not wealthy in the traditional sense." "What if we don't want this responsibility?" Emma asked quietly. "Or what if we're not qualified to manage this much money and help this many people?" Elena smiled. "Your father anticipated that question too." She withdrew a final document from her briefcase. "If you choose not to accept the Foundation directorship, the estate will be liquidated and donated to established charities. You'll receive the original $1 inheritance, plus a small trust fund that will ensure the children's college education and basic family security." "So we really could walk away," Jack said, understanding the full scope of his father's final gift. "He's not forcing this on us. Richard wanted to give you the choice. He never felt he had," Eleanor explained. "When the threats began, he felt trapped by circumstances beyond his control. This time, the choice is entirely yours." Henry, who had been quietly watching from near the windows, finally spoke. "There's something else you need to know before you decide. Your father wasn't just building this foundation for the community. He was building it for you, Jack. He believed that helping others heal would help you heal too." Elena nodded. "Richard struggled with depression after your mother died, and again after he made the decision to distance himself from your family. He found that his anonymous charitable work was the only thing that gave his life meaning. He hoped it might do the same for you." Jack walked to the lighthouse windows, looking out over the community where he'd struggled and survived, where his children were growing up with the same challenges he'd faced. Below, the lights of Beacon Point were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Working families like his, gathering around dinner tables, helping with homework, tucking children into bed with the quiet hope that tomorrow might be a little easier than today. What would we actually do? He asked. Day to day, I mean. How does a foundation work? Elena had clearly prepared for this question. Your father envisioned you as the executive director, making decisions about which families to help and how to help them. Emma could oversee educational programs when she's ready. Marcus could develop youth sports and mentorship initiatives. Even Lucy could contribute as she grows older. We'd work together? Marcus asked, his voice carrying hope. As a family, Elena confirmed. Your father believed that the best way to strengthen a community was to strengthen families, and the best way to strengthen families was to give them meaningful work to do together. Henry moved to join Jack at the window. Your father used to stand right here and imagine what it would look like if every family in Beacon Point had what they needed. Not just money, but opportunity, dignity, hope. He designed the foundation. To make that vision possible, Jack thought about Mrs. Chen's grandson, whose heart surgery had been funded by his father's anonymous generosity. About Tom Bradley, whose daughter's scholarship had given her a chance at college. About the dozens of families who used the community center's programs without ever knowing they were benefiting from his father's hidden love. There's one more thing, Elena said softly. Your father left personal messages for each of you, videos he recorded in the months before his death. He wanted you to hear them only after you'd made your decision about the foundation. She gestured toward a vintage television set that Jack hadn't noticed before, tucked into an alcove with a collection of videotapes labeled with their names. Emma picked up the tape marked for Emma and turned it over in her hands. What if we watch them and then decide we can't live up to what he wanted? Then you'll know you made an honest decision based on complete information, Elena replied. Your father's love for you isn't conditional on accepting his final gift. He'll be proud of whatever choice you make, as long as you make it together as a family. Jack gathered his children around him in the lighthouse where his father had once lifted him high enough to see the whole world. The brass key that had unlocked so many secrets now felt like a symbol of possibility rather than obligation. What do you think? He asked his children. Are we ready to find out what Grandpa wanted? To tell us directly? Lucy nodded solemnly. I want to hear his voice. I want to know what Grandpas sound like. Marcus cleared his throat. I think we should watch the videos first, then decide about the foundation. We need all the information. Emma looked around. The lighthouse room, taking in the photographs, the documents, the evidence of a love that had never wavered despite the distance it had maintained. I think Grandpa spent his whole life preparing us for this moment. Maybe it's time we stopped being afraid of it. As Elena loaded the first videotape into the player, Jack realized that his father's greatest inheritance wasn't money or property, or even the foundation itself. It was the opportunity to transform pain into purpose, to turn a lifetime of feeling not enough into the power to ensure that other families would always have enough. The $1 bill had been the first move, in a game designed not to test Jack's worthiness, but to reveal it. Now, surrounded by his children in the place where his father had once promised him he could see the whole world, Jack was finally ready to look. The television screen flickered to life, and suddenly Richard Calder was in the room with them, not the distant, intimidating figure from Jack's memories, but a tired, gentle man with silver hair and eyes that held decades of regret and love. Hello, Emma, Richard's recorded voice said, and Jack's 16-year-old daughter gasped at hearing her name spoken by the grandfather she'd never met. If you're watching this, it means your father has chosen to understand rather than to judge, and I'm so grateful for that choice. Richard sat in what appeared to be his study, surrounded by books and photographs. His hands, which Jack remembered as strong and commanding, now showed the tremor of illness and age. "I want to tell you about the day you were born," Richard continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Your father called me from the hospital, so excited he could barely speak coherently. 'She's perfect, Dad,' he said. 'She has Sarah's eyes and the strongest grip I've ever felt. I wanted so badly to come see you, to hold my first grandchild, but the threats were at their worst then. So I sat in the hospital parking lot for 3 hours, watching the windows of the maternity ward and crying like a child." Emma wiped tears from her eyes as her grandfather continued. "I've watched you grow into a young woman of remarkable intelligence and character. Your essay about economic inequality in coastal communities, yes, I read it online when your school posted it, showed insight that would impress seasoned economists. You have the power to change how societies think about fairness and opportunity. Never doubt that." The video shifted to Marcus's message. Richard's expression softened further as he addressed his grandson. "Marcus, my boy, you have your father's natural athletic ability, but more importantly, you have his instinct to protect others. I've watched you step between bullies and smaller children, seen you share your lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. These small acts of kindness matter more than any trophy you might win." Jack watched his 12-year-old son absorb his grandfather's words with the hunger of a child who had never experienced unconditional male approval from an elder. "I've left specific instructions for your baseball development," Richard continued. "There's a former major league coach in Portland who owes me a favor. He's expecting your call when you're ready. But remember, the goal isn't to make you famous. It's to teach you that dedication and practice can overcome almost any obstacle." Lucy's video began with Richard holding up a small, hand-carved wooden sunflower, clearly made by someone who was more enthusiastic than skilled. "Lucy, my sunshine, I made this for you while I was learning about your school play. I'm sorry I wasn't there to give it to you in person, but I hope it reminds you that sunflowers are smart flowers. They always turn toward the light, even on cloudy days." Lucy clutched the real wooden sunflower that Elena had quietly placed. In her hands, her 8-year-old heart overwhelmed by this tangible proof of her grandfather's love. "You bring joy everywhere you go, sweetheart. I've watched you comfort your friends when they're sad, celebrate with them when they're happy, and find wonder in ordinary moments that adults forget to notice. Never lose that gift. The world needs people who remember how to find light in dark places." Finally, the tape changed to Jack's message, and father faced son across the barrier of death with an intimacy they'd never achieved in life. "Jack," Richard's voice broke slightly on his son's name. "My greatest pride and my deepest regret. I've spent 15 years trying to find words that could bridge the gap my fear created, and I realize now that no words will ever be enough." Richard stood and moved to a window, looking out at a view that Jack recognized as the ocean visible from the family estate. "I want to tell you about the night you were born. I had just received the most serious death threat yet. Detailed plans about how they would hurt anyone I cared about. I held you for exactly 10 minutes before the terror overwhelmed me. What if loving you put you in danger? What if my enemies decided to use my son against me?" Richard turned back to the camera, his face etched with pain. "I made a choice that night to love you from a distance, to protect you by appearing not to care. It was the most painful decision of my life, and I've regretted it every day since. But I never regretted having you, Jack. You were never the problem. I was." Jack felt Emma's hand slip into his as his father continued speaking directly to him across the years of silence. "I know you think you've failed because you couldn't provide everything your family needed. I know you blame yourself for struggles that were never your fault. But Jack, you succeeded in ways I never could. You raised 3 remarkable children while holding down jobs and caring for a sick wife. You chose love over wealth, family over status, presence over protection. You made every choice I was too afraid to make." Richard sat back down, leaning forward as if he could somehow close the physical distance between them. "The foundation isn't Charity, son. It's recognition. You've spent your life proving that character matters more than circumstances, that love matters more than money, that showing up matters more than showing off. I'm asking you to take those lessons and scale them up. Be the father to this community that I never knew how to be to you. The video paused, and Richard seemed to gather himself for his final words. I love you, Jack. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I'm sorry it took my death to find the courage to tell you so. Whatever you choose to do with this inheritance, know that you already possess everything that matters most: the love of your children, the respect of your community, and the strength to face any challenge. The screen went dark, leaving the lighthouse room in contemplative silence. Jack sat surrounded by his family, processing 30 years of misunderstanding that had been reframed in 30 minutes of recorded truth. Elena spoke first. Your father recorded those messages 6 months before he died. He spent weeks rehearsing what he wanted to say, determined to get it right. Why didn't he just call? Marcus asked, his voice small and confused. If he loved us, why didn't he just pick up the phone? Henry answered gently. Because he knew that once he heard your voices, he wouldn't be able to stay away. And the threats were real, Marcus. There were FBI reports, police investigations. Your grandfather chose to break his own heart rather than risk yours. Jack stood and walked to the lighthouse windows, looking down at the community center where he'd spent countless nights mopping floors and emptying trash, never knowing he was working in a building his father owned and operated as an act of love. What happens if we say yes? He asked Elena. What are the actual next steps? Tomorrow morning we transfer ownership of all foundation assets to you. You'll meet with the current program directors. There are 12 of them, managing everything from the food bank to the scholarship programs. You'll have complete authority to expand, modify, or create new initiatives. And if we say no, the assets are liquidated within 60 days. The existing programs continue for 1 year while the money is distributed to established charities nationwide. The community center, the medical clinic, the after-school programs, they'll all close when the funding ends. Emma looked around the lighthouse room at the photographs, documents, and videos that revealed the scope of her grandfather's hidden love. How many families are we talking about? How many people depend on these programs directly? About 300 families in Beacon Point and the surrounding area. Indirectly, probably twice that number when you count extended family members, employers who benefit from job training programs, landlords who receive reliable rent from families with stable support systems. Jack thought about Mrs. Chen, about Tom Bradley's daughter, about the dozens of families he saw every day at the community center who were struggling with the same challenges his family faced. The foundation wouldn't just change his family's life. It could transform an entire community's relationship with hope and opportunity. I need to ask you all something, Jack said, turning to face his children. This isn't just my decision. If we do this, it changes all of our lives. Emma, you'd grow up as the daughter of the foundation director. Marcus, Lucy, people would know your family as the one that helps other families. That's a responsibility, but it's also pressure. Emma stood and joined her father at the window. Dad, I've spent 2 years watching you come home exhausted every night from jobs that barely pay our bills. I've seen you choose between groceries and gas money, between my college applications and Lucy's school supplies. If Grandpa is offering us a way to stop struggling and start helping others stop struggling too, shouldn't we at least try? Marcus nodded. Besides, if we don't do it, who will? Grandpa built all this for us, specifically. Maybe we're supposed to be the ones. Lucy, still clutching her wooden sunflower, offered the 8-year-old wisdom that often cuts straight to the heart of complex adult dilemmas. Grandpa said sunflowers always turn toward the light. Maybe the foundation is how we turn toward the light too. As night fell completely over Beacon Point, Jack stood in the lighthouse where his father had once promised him he could see the whole world. Finally understanding that the choice before him wasn't about accepting money or responsibility. It was about accepting the opportunity to transform pain into purpose, struggle into strength, and love into action that could ripple through generations. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the Pacific Northwest sky had decided to cooperate with the magnitude of Jack's decision. He stood in the kitchen of their rental house, holding a cup of coffee and staring at the formal documents. Elena had left with them the foundation charter that would transform their family from recipients of hidden charity into stewards of community hope. Emma sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, already researching successful community foundations across the country. Her academic mind had seized on the challenge like a puzzle to be solved. "Dad, look at this," she said, turning the screen toward him. "The Hartford Foundation in Connecticut has programs almost identical to what Grandpa designed. They've lifted the graduation rate in their target neighborhoods by 40% in just 5 years. Marcus emerged from his bedroom carrying his baseball glove and the wooden sunflower Lucy had reluctantly let him borrow. "I keep thinking about what Grandpa said about dedication and practice, overcoming obstacles. Maybe he meant the foundation, too, not just baseball." Lucy bounded into the kitchen with the energy of someone who had made peace with complexity through the simple logic of childhood. "Are we going to say yes? Because I already drew a picture of our new house for Mrs. Chen." Jack smiled, despite his nerves. "What did you draw, sweetheart?" "A big house with lots of rooms so people can come visit when they need help. And a garden where Mrs. Chen can grow vegetables for families who don't have enough food." The innocence of Lucy's vision cut through Jack's remaining uncertainty. His daughter had instinctively understood what the foundation could become, not just a source of financial assistance, but a place where community members could find dignity, support, and connection. Elena arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a briefcase and the calm efficiency of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. Behind her came Henry Walsh and a woman Jack didn't recognize. Elderly, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to important decisions. "This is Margaret Donovan," Elena said. "She's been the interim director of the foundations. He programs since your father's death. If you choose to accept the directorship, she'll help transition you into the role." Margaret stepped forward with a warm smile. "Your father spoke of you often, Jack. He was confident you'd make the right choice, whatever that choice might be." They gathered around the kitchen table, and Elena opened her briefcase with ceremonial care. Inside were 2 sets of documents. One, transferring the foundation assets to Jack, the other executing the liquidation plan if he declined the responsibility. "Before you sign anything," Margaret said, "I want you to understand what you'd be taking on. The foundation currently supports 12 major programs and about 40 smaller initiatives. The administrative work requires attention to detail, financial oversight, and constant community engagement. It's not just about giving money away, it's about building relationships, understanding needs, and measuring impact." Emma leaned forward. "What's the hardest part of the job?" "Saying no," Margaret replied immediately. "Every day people ask for help. Good people, deserving people, people with genuine needs. But resources are finite, even large resources. You have to develop the wisdom to distinguish between help that creates dependency and help that creates opportunity." Jack thought about his own family's experience with his father's hidden assistance. The medical bills that had been mysteriously paid, the subsidized rent that had provided stability without eliminating the need for Jack to work. His father had understood the delicate balance between support and self-reliance. "What's the most rewarding part?" Marcus asked. Margaret's face lit up. "Watching families transform. I remember the Henderson family. Father lost his job in the mill closure, mother working 2 part-time jobs with no benefits. We helped with emergency expenses while the father went through our job training program. 18 months later, he's a certified electrician, earning more than he ever made at the mill. Their daughter just got a foundation scholarship for community college." "Grandpa would have loved that story," Lucy said solemnly. Elena spread the Foundation charter across the table. The decision is yours, Jack, but I need an answer today. The interim arrangements expire at midnight, and the Foundation's operations can't continue in limbo. Jack looked around the table at his children, seeing Sarah's strength in Emma's determination, his own cautious optimism in Marcus's questions, and something entirely new in Lucy's innocent wisdom. They had survived Sarah's death, financial hardship, and his father's complicated legacy. They had learned that love sometimes looked like distance, that strength sometimes looked like struggle, and that gifts sometimes came disguised as challenges. "I have one condition," Jack said finally. Elena nodded. "What is it?" "This has to be a family operation. Emma, Marcus, and Lucy aren't just the director's children. They're part of the Foundation's leadership. Their voices matter in every major decision." Margaret smiled. "Your father hoped you'd say something like that. He believed the Foundation should model the kind of family engagement he wished he'd practiced himself." Jack picked up the pen. Eleanor offered him and looked at the signature line that would transform their lives. Around him, his family waited with the patient attention of people who had learned to trust each other completely. "Are we ready?" he asked. 3 voices answered in unison, "Yes." Jack signed his name with steady hands, each letter representing a choice to transform his father's hidden love into visible action. The moment the pen left the paper, he felt a shift in the room's energy. Not just the legal transfer of assets, but the emotional transition from recipients to stewards, from struggling to serving. Elena gathered the signed documents with the satisfaction of someone completing a years-long mission. "Congratulations, Jack. You're now the executive director of the Calder Family Foundation, with assets of $78 million and the responsibility for improving lives throughout this community." Margaret opened her own folder, revealing organizational charts, program budgets, and contact lists. "Your father's estate includes the community center where you've been working, but also 12 other properties throughout Beacon Point. We operate everything from emergency housing to job training centers." Emma studied the property list with growing excitement. "The old Mackenzie building downtown. That's Foundation property too. Your grandfather bought it last year with plans to convert it into affordable housing for working families. The architectural plans are complete, but the project was waiting for his final approval." Jack remembered the Mackenzie building, a beautiful but deteriorating structure that had sat empty for years while property values pushed working families further from the town center. His father had been planning to create affordable housing in the heart of the community, keeping families close to jobs and schools instead of forcing them to the outskirts. "How soon could we start construction?" Marcus asked, catching his father's enthusiasm. "The permits are approved. The contractors are selected," Margaret replied. "We were waiting for the Foundation Director's authorization to proceed. You could break ground next month if you choose." Lucy had been quietly examining photographs of the various Foundation properties. "This looks like a playground," she said, pointing to an image of a community garden with children playing between raised vegetable beds. "The Riverside Community Garden," Margaret confirmed. "Families can grow their own food while children play in a safe environment. It's been one of our most successful programs, teaching nutrition, building community connections, and reducing grocery expenses for participating families." Jack felt the scope of his father's vision expanding in his mind. This wasn't just charity, it was community architecture, designed to strengthen the social fabric that connected neighbors to each other and families to opportunity. Henry Walsh, who had been quietly observing the legal proceedings, finally spoke. "Your father spent 5 years designing these programs, but he always said the real test would be what happened after he was gone. He believed you'd find ways to improve and expand everything he'd started." Elena handed Jack a set of keys, literal keys to buildings, vehicles, and offices throughout Beacon Point. "These represent your father's infrastructure, but not his limitations." You have complete authority to modify, expand, or create entirely new programs based on what you learn about community needs. Margaret smiled. Actually, your father specifically hoped you'd change things. He said Jack would see needs he'd missed and find solutions he'd never considered. Emma looked up from the organizational charts she'd been studying. What about the $1 bill? Does it have any special meaning now that we know the truth? Elena reached into her briefcase and withdrew the original dollar bill from the will reading, the one Jack had refused to take. Your father included specific instructions about this. He wanted it framed and displayed in the foundation offices as a reminder that the smallest gifts sometimes open the door to the largest possibilities. Jack accepted the dollar bill, feeling its symbolic weight. What had seemed like his father's final insult was actually his first gift, the key that unlocked understanding, forgiveness, and purpose. There's one more thing, Margaret said, consulting. Her notes. Your father arranged for a community celebration next month to announce the foundation's new leadership. He wanted Beacon Point to know that the Calder family was stepping forward to continue and expand the community support programs. A celebration? Lucy asked, her eyes lighting up. Nothing fancy, Margaret assured them. A community barbecue. At the center, with presentations about new programs and opportunities for people to get involved as volunteers. Jack imagined standing before his neighbors, people who had seen him struggle, who had offered quiet support during his family's hardest times, and announcing that the help they'd given him was about to be returned multiplied. Mrs. Chen would be there, Tom Bradley, the families from the community center who had become extended family during the years when his nuclear family felt too small to contain all their grief and hope. Dad, Emma said softly, I think we should create a memorial garden at the community center, something to honor both Mom and Grandpa, but also to give families a place to remember their own loved ones. Jack felt his throat tighten with emotion. A memory garden, where people can go to feel connected to those they've lost. With benches for quiet conversations, Marcus added, and maybe a space where kids can plant flowers for people they miss. Lucy clapped her hands together, and the wooden sunflower Grandpa made for me could be the first thing we put there. Margaret nodded approvingly. Your father would love that idea. He always said the foundation should honor the past while building the future. Elena checked her watch. I'm afraid I need to head back to the office to file these documents, but congratulations, Jack. Your father spent years wondering if you'd forgive him enough to accept his final gift. I think he'd be overwhelmed by how quickly you've embraced not just the gift, but the opportunity to improve upon it. After Elena left, the family sat around their kitchen table, the same table where they'd shared modest meals and worried about bills, now planning how to help other families facing the same challenges. What's our first priority? Jack asked his children. Emma consulted the program lists. The scholarship applications for next year's college students are due in 6 weeks. We could expand the program, maybe add mentoring support. Marcus studied the community center programs, the after-school sports. Leagues are limited by equipment costs. We could outfit every kid who wants to play, regardless of family income. Lucy held up her drawing of the big house with rooms for people who needed help. Can we really have a place where families can stay when they don't have homes? The emergency housing program already exists, Margaret explained, but it's small, only 4 units. With the Mackenzie building renovation, we could house 20 families in transition. Jack felt the magnitude of possibility settling around him like a comfortable weight. For years, he'd focused on his family's immediate needs, fighting to keep their heads above water. Now he had the resources and authority to address the systemic issues that created those struggles for families throughout their community. I want to do something your grandfather never could, Jack said suddenly. I want this foundation to be completely transparent. Annual reports, public meetings, community input on major decisions. No more secrets, no more anonymous gifts. People should know where help is coming from and have a voice in how it's provided. Margaret smiled. That's exactly the kind of evolution your father hoped you'd bring to his work. As afternoon sunlight streamed through their kitchen windows, Jack realized that his father's greatest inheritance wasn't the money or the foundation infrastructure. It was the opportunity to transform a lifetime of feeling powerless into the power to change lives, to turn personal struggle into community strength, to ensure that no family in Beacon Point would face the kind of isolation and financial terror that had defined the Calder family's recent years. The $1 bill sat in the center of the table, no longer a symbol of rejection, but a reminder that the smallest acts of faith, choosing to understand instead of judge, to forgive instead of resent, to build instead of tear down, can unlock possibilities that seemed impossible just days before. Henry Walsh gathered his papers and prepared to leave. Your father used to say that love isn't measured by how close you stand to someone, but by how much you're willing to sacrifice to keep them safe and help them thrive. You're about to discover just how much love, $78 million, can express when it's guided by a heart that understands both struggle and hope. As the meeting concluded and their guests departed, Jack stood in his modest kitchen, surrounded by his children and the documents that would transform their lives. Finally understanding that his father's distance had never been about love withheld. It had been about love so powerful it was willing to break its own heart rather than risk the hearts it treasured most. 6 months later, Jack stood in the memorial garden behind the Seaside Community Center, watching his children help families plant flowers in honor of loved ones they'd lost. The garden had become the heart of the center's expanded campus, a place where grief and hope mingled in the practical work of making beautiful things grow. Lucy's wooden sunflower held the place of honor near the garden's entrance, weathered now by rain and sun, but still turning its carved face toward the light. Beside it, a bronze plaque read, "In memory of Richard Calder and Sarah Calder, who loved from a distance and up close, and in honor of all families who know that love sometimes requires sacrifice." Emma approached, carrying a clipboard filled with scholarship applications. At 17, she had grown into her role as the Foundation's education coordinator, with the natural authority of someone who understood both academic excellence and financial struggle. "Dad, we have 43 applications for next year's college scholarships. That's triple what Grandpa funded last year. Can we handle that many?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. The Foundation's careful investments had grown, even during the months of transition, and community donations had begun supplementing the original endowment as word spread about the Calder family's transparent, collaborative approach to philanthropy. "Easily," Emma replied, "especially with the new mentoring program. High school graduates are coming back to help current students navigate the application process. It's like Grandpa's investment is multiplying itself." Marcus jogged over from the sports fields where he'd been coaching a mixed-age baseball clinic. His natural athletic ability had translated into genuine teaching skill, and the Foundation's expanded sports programs now served twice as many children as the previous year. "Mrs. Chen wants to know if she can start a cooking class in the community kitchen next month. She says teaching kids to prepare healthy meals on a budget is just as important as giving their families food assistance." Jack smiled, remembering their elderly neighbor's quiet wisdom during their family's darkest days. Mrs. Chen had become the Foundation's unofficial community liaison, connecting staff with families who needed help but were too proud to ask directly. "Tell her yes and ask if she needs any special equipment." The community barbecue was in full swing around them, families from throughout Beacon Point gathering to celebrate the Foundation's first 6 months under new leadership. Tom Bradley manned one of the grills, having been promoted to facilities manager of the expanded community center. His daughter Sarah, named for Jack's wife, was home from her freshman year of college, funded by a Foundation scholarship that had removed financial stress from her family's celebration of her academic achievements. Mr. Calder, a teenage boy approached hesitantly, carrying a manila envelope. I'm Danny Rivera. My mom said I should give this to you personally. Jack recognized the name. The Rivera family had been among the first to benefit from the Foundation's emergency housing program when Danny's father was injured at work. What is it, Danny? My acceptance letter to the community college engineering program. With the Foundation scholarship, I can start in the fall. The boy's voice carried the same mixture of disbelief and gratitude that Jack remembered feeling when he'd first understood the scope of his father's hidden gifts. That's wonderful news. Your mother must be proud, she cried, Danny admitted. Happy crying, though. She said nobody in our family has ever gone to college before. As Danny walked away to rejoin his family, Jack felt the familiar surge of purpose that had defined his life since accepting the Foundation directorship. Each success story, each family stabilized, each dream made possible, they all felt like conversations with his father, proof that Richard's complicated love had been transformed into something simple and powerful, the ability to say yes when families needed help most. Elena Martinez approached, carrying a leather-bound journal similar to the one Richard had kept. Your 6-month report for the board, she said, handing it to Jack. I think your father would be amazed by what you've accomplished. Jack opened the journal to find detailed reports on every Foundation program, but also something new. Personal reflections he'd been writing about the families they'd helped, and the lessons he was learning about community leadership. Without realizing it, he'd begun documenting the Foundation's work the same way his father had documented their family's life. The numbers are impressive, Eleanor continued. Emergency assistance provided to 47 families, job training completed by 32 adults, housing transitions facilitated for 18 families, college scholarships awarded to 23 students. But more importantly, the community surveys show something your father never achieved. People know where the help is coming from, and they feel empowered to participate in decisions about how it's provided. Lucy ran up to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement from helping younger children plant marigolds around the memorial stones. Daddy, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if we can help her start a book club for kids whose parents work night shifts. She says reading together would be good for families who don't see each other much during regular hours. What do you think, sweetheart? Lucy considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all Foundation matters. I think books help people understand each other better, and maybe some of the parents could join when they're not working. Jack added Mrs. Patterson's suggestion to his mental list of new programs to explore. The Foundation's responsiveness to community-generated ideas had become one of its defining characteristics, ensuring that help flowed toward genuine needs, rather than administrative assumptions about what families required. As evening approached and the barbecue wound down, Jack found himself standing where his father had once stood, watching his children play among families whose lives had been touched by Calder generosity, but seeing the scene clearly instead of from a fearful distance. Emma was helping elderly residents plan a community garden expansion. Marcus was organizing the sports equipment with the careful attention of someone who understood its value. Lucy was reading a picture book to a group of younger children, a voice carrying the confidence of someone who had always known she was loved completely. The $1 bill now hung framed in Jack's office, but its lesson lived in every Foundation decision, the smallest acknowledgments of love when received, with open hearts, can unlock possibilities that transform not just individual families, but entire communities. His father's final gift hadn't been money. It had been the recognition that Jack possessed everything necessary to turn struggle into strength, isolation into connection, and private pain into public healing. In his jacket pocket, Jack carried a new journal, its first entry written in his own hand. Today we began what Dad couldn't finish, loving our community openly, powerfully, and without fear. The children understand what I'm still learning, that the best way to honor those we've lost is to love those we can still help. Standing in the garden where grief and hope grew side by side, Jack finally understood that his father's greatest inheritance was the simple truth that love, when expressed through action rather than proximity, can reach across any distance and heal wounds that seemed permanent. The foundation would continue long after Jack was gone, but its heart would always be the recognition that families matter, community matters, and love, however imperfectly expressed, has the power to transform everything it touches.